Good morning and welcome to the Climate Action Network press conference today. Today is a very important day as the climate finance goal talks really heat up. And on the panel, we're going to be discussing about the red lines around the climate finance goal. On the panel with me today, we have Claudio Angelo, Communications Coordinator with Observatorio do Clima, and he will be covering the NCQG red lines regarding Brazil and Grupo Sur. Then we'll be hearing from Marlene Ciocchi, who will be speaking about the red lines regarding the climate finance goal for the African group of negotiators. And then finally, regarding the red lines on NCQG, when it comes from the civil society perspective, we'll be hearing from Safa Al-Jaoussi. So first we'll hear from Claudio. Over to you, Claudio.
Good morning. Welcome everyone to Week 2 drama. And there's no good COP without a Week 2 drama, and that's what we're living right now. I think the difference in this COP is that negotiations here in Baku seem to be happening as much in the negotiating rooms and in bilaterals as through the media. And that's slightly unusual. We have the same countries playing the same divide and conquer tactics. And on the other hand, the G77 is trying to hold the line. And right now, Brazil, along with the United Kingdom, are trying to bring the whole thing to focus in this presidency advisory group. For Brazil and Grupo Sur, I think the red lines for NCQG are pretty simple. The first of all is justice. We have a climate debt that's owed by a certain number of countries, developed countries. And that's why Grupo Sur and Brazil stand for a public finance core. The second red line is on transparency, because as we all learned from the traumatic experience of the old goal of 100 billion, the quantum is as important as what goes in as finance money. So Grupo Sur is very stringent on a definition of climate finance and on an exclusion list as well. We must understand what climate finance is not, so that we can have a proper conversation about what climate finance is. And finally, to no one's surprise, Grupo Sur is also very strong on donors base. This is an absolute red line for all the G77. We are negotiating under Article 9 of the convention here. And so we're talking about finance that should be provided and mobilized by rich countries to developing countries. And I'll stay here.
Thank you, Claudio. So last night we've been, hearing from the African group of negotiators regarding their stance and their red lines when it comes to the climate finance goal. And we're reaching a point of real emotion here. These talks aren't just about technicalities and figures on paper, they're about people's lives. And for more on that, we'll go to Marlene.
Thank you, Danny. So addressing climate crisis has never been more urgent than now. African countries wake up every morning to a crime they did not commit. And therefore, AGN is very, very specific about the red lines that they would like to see from COP29 on the NCQG quantum, both on the number and the qualitative aspects of that. So just to start us off, AGN, the Africa group were among the first groups who fronted the number of 1.3 trillion that is actually backed by needs determination report and the science base behind that. And we have had numbers flying around 200 billion, 300 billion. What is that number based upon? So AGN is very specific about the 1.3 using the science base and the needs-based report that has been done behind the number. So in the context of NCQG, we feel like it's a very promising framework to address financial needs for African countries to ensure that they're able to build the resilience and adaptive capacity to climate change. So the AGN has a number of red lines that they would not want to cross when it comes to negotiating the 1.3 trillion. Number one, it has to be very ambitious, taking into consideration the scale and true urgency of the climate crisis that the African countries are actually facing. Secondly, it's very important for the quantum, the new collective quantified goal, to provide terms on accessibility, so quick access to climate finance to help address the crisis around adaptation and loss and damage in particular. Additional to that, the 1.3 trillion asked from the Africa Group has to be from public source and grants-based. And this is because we're already seeing a lot of African countries in debts addressing other issues, and they're also sinking in already debt from climate finance. A lot of climate finance flowing to African countries, 90% of that is through loans. And therefore, it presents a good opportunity for the NCQG to ensure that the climate finance flowing to African countries, developing countries, is grants and not loans to reduce the burdens that they're already going through. Finally, it's very important for the new collective quantified goal to be gender responsive and inclusion to support women and girls, the indigenous groups who are facing the impacts of climate change more, and they did not contribute to this crisis. So the new collective quantified goal must be gender responsive, and one of the key objectives to finance flow of the new NCQG should be gender equality, to ensure that women and girls, women-led organizations, women rights organizations, local organizations have access to the climate finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene. So we've heard clearly now the red lines regarding the climate finance goal when it comes to the African group of negotiators and also Grupo Sur in Brazil. Now we'll hear what the red lines are from civil society when it comes to the climate finance goal, and for that we'll hear from Safa.
Thank you. So my name is Safa El Jayousi. I'm a Palestinian woman that is fighting two battles today. The battle of the climate finance and the climate crisis. People are living in extreme climate crisis. And the other battle is ensuring that my family, my friends and colleagues are alive and safe. And also, instead of investing in life-saving aid and the climate resilience actions, we see countries are spending dollars on weapons that fuel wars. It is stolen from the climate action and the climate investment. It's stolen from fighting inequality, poverty, and hunger. So let's start from the basics. And when it comes to our red lines, because basics get lost every day here in endless negotiations. And it's an unbalanced power. The facts is simple. The richest countries are responsible for 92% of the excess emissions. The second fact that northern countries build their wealth from colonialism, neo-colonialism, and exploitation of nature and people, especially from where I come from the global south. Third fact that we live in a world where over 5 billion people live in poverty. It's based on these realities that Oxfam and many other organizations and civil society actors are calling for the global north countries to pay 5 trillion in climate debt and reparation to countries in the global south, to communities in the front lines of the climate crisis. This finance should be public and grant-based. This finance should be covering loss and damage, adaptation, mitigation, technological transfer, and debt relief. There are many examples from the global south and around the world. Somalia is one that is facing a devastating drought and floods. These floods caused an estimated $176 million in combined damages and losses. The back-to-back crises have pushed 4 million people, 21% of the population, into emergency levels of hungers. Many areas of Somaliland are hard hit by both climate change conflict, yet does not receive any direct climate finance. We see stories like this happens every day, communities at the front line of the climate crisis. That's why what we are doing here is so important. Climate finance is so important, and the climate finance that supports communities at the front line of the climate crisis is so important. So what I mentioned, it's not only facts and figures, it's our daily lives. Climate finance goal should come directly to us to help us. This funding would help community who have contributed at least to climate crisis. They need our support now on mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage to recover from the impacts of climate change and to have access to life-saving green technologies. We must not fail them in those negotiations, and we must not fail ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Safa. Now we'll go to questions. Please state your name and your organization. Front row, please.
Hello, I'm Alistair Thompson from Scoop Media. Alistair Thompson from Scoop Media, which is a New Zealand publication. I've been looking. I mean, the approach which the developed nations are taking to finance seems to be a layered approach with public finance plus MDB finance plus private finance.
Sorry, can you speak up, please?
Sorry, the approach which seems to be being taken in these negotiations is this layered approach of public finance underpinning MDB expansion of capital. On top of that, private finance at lower concessionary interest rates because of de-risking. So, I mean, that's my understanding of what the structure is. Is there anyone here that can speak to that? Because, I mean, and then the second question is, I heard last night from somebody who was in the high-level segment meeting who said that the developed world was reneging on the target of $1 trillion. So they were pulling back from the $1 trillion target and pushing for a $500 billion target in the initial phase anyway. And I mean, I spoke to another ambassador who sort of suggested that was possible and that maybe the developed world will end up kicking this to Brazil.
I'm having trouble hearing you. Can you just summarize your question? Because it came out really low.
It seems, I can hear it. Seems loud to me. Sorry. Okay. So the layered approach to, okay, sorry, there we go. The layered approach to finance, which seems to be at the core of what the negotiators are working on. The presidency, like they had a meeting of all of the MDBs on Monday. They came out with 120 or rising to $120 billion a year in mobilized MDB finance, which I think is largely coming from quantitative easing by the MDB institutions. On top of that, the idea is that you then have private finance, which is concessionary. Now, I understand that the activist community and a lot of the messaging that we're hearing here is about public direct financing of nation states. But I mean, to some extent, that didn't work with the $100 billion goal in the past anyway.
Sorry, so what is your question, please?
Well, so the question is, what can you tell us about where the negotiations are in relation to the layered financing and what the current, where people are pointing to where the landing point is going to be here?
For us as civil society to have a successful outcomes from this COP on NCQG, we have to have at least $1 trillion in public financing. And this is really important for us because it's not a charity that we are asking for. And even we are talking about grants, it's not about charity. We saw that private sector cannot take the lead in a private investment in 1 trillion at least, as it's often driven by profit. And investment from private sector is always, and most of the time, are going through to mitigation, and we also need adaptation and loss and damage. So, and we've seen that it's been higher in mitigation because basically due to the market interest. So adaptation suffers from that. So we are asking as civil society to have at least 1 trillion on public financing.
To add on my colleague's Safa sentiments, for the Africa group, for them, they're very intentional about the quality. And so they are already in depth, like we already said, and do not want to encourage the layering of that, because we saw that with the 100 billion. And even with the 100 billion not met, 90% of that was purely loans. And so even with the layering and all that, that is the approach, that is the roadmap of where the developed countries want to take us. And therefore for the Africa group, they are not ready to engage in that as at now, because the focus is grants-based finance.
Just in addition to that, a lot of developed countries have come here stating that multi-layered is a fact. It is not. It is not in line with the Paris Agreement. We are talking about public finance because that is in line with the Paris Agreement. The multi-layered approach, whatever we're hearing, that is not a given. That is what developed countries have come to state as a fact, and that is absolutely incorrect. Also regarding development banks, we know through history the private finance isn't there to go into development banks for climate action. So it's a moot point.
Maybe just jumping in quickly, there's another debate that doesn't belong here, which is aligning finance with the objectives of the Paris Agreement. That's under Article 21C of the Paris Agreement. This is a debate that we're not having here. We're talking here about public finance, about Article 9. So all this broader mobilization conversation should be held elsewhere. There will be a time for that next year at COP30.
Any other questions? Front row.
Hello, thank you. I'm Ferdinando Cotugna from Domani. Are you worried by how European Union is playing this COP, and what do you think about how they're moving in these final days of COP29? Thank you.
It's standard issue European Union. That's what they're doing here, and that's what they were trying to do at the G20 in Rio this week. No news here. It's just regrettable that the group of countries that should really be leading this conversation is playing the same old, we don't have it, we won't pay you tactics.
I think it's very concerning because we are seeing lack of political will in these all debates, taking the conversation that took place from the G20 meeting. And the European Union are flagging the 200 billion. You know, these numbers are just flying around that we do not know what is the basis of that. And so it's worrying because from the 1.3 trillion, which is the Africa group of negotiators ask, down to 200 or 300 billion, that is a joke, in my opinion.
Yeah, we've seen that the EU is just being quite confused right now. As my colleague said, 200 billion, 300 billion, but they won't confirm that. So, you know, there's an element there of playing games. They also pushed forward with the multi-layered approach. And I mean, the 200, 300 billion, when you allow for inflation, that's no difference. So, yeah. Front row, please.
Good morning, Alberto Giuffre, Sky News Italy. Which role China should play in this context?
This has been going on since Paris Agreement and beyond, since the creation of the UNFCCC process. where northern countries and developed countries want to put the blame on other developing countries. That includes all the countries in the global north. What we want, we are seeing that rich countries have been using contributor base to slow negotiations. Like other countries should pay for the climate finance instead of them pledging for their own commitments. So Article 9.1, 9.2 are very, very obvious that states that developed countries must provide finance figures, and developing countries can voluntarily do that. And this is what is stated in the agreement itself. So rich countries must own up their responsibility and pay up their commitments.
Second row. Sorry, third row.
Hi, I'm Anushka from Carbon Copy. Can you hear me? Sorry. Anushka from Carbon Copy. There was a Guardian article today which quoted some delegates from the poorer nations saying that India and China should not be considered developing nations. I just wanted to know if you had a comment on that.
Yeah, you know what's funny is that for some countries, the world order of the 1990s has changed. And so countries that were developing countries back in the 90s are no longer developing countries. However, when you talk about reforming international financial institutions, the order of the 1940s is just fine. I wonder how does that fit with reality?
I think that the contributor-based discussion should not distract us from the key issues here. The Paris Agreement is clear that the developed countries need to take lead. And so I think these other conversations, it's okay, they can have them, but should not stop or distract the focus of the developed countries providing the 1 trillion climate finance and in public, from public source and in grants. I think that should be the key message and should be very clear. These other theatrics that we're getting to see from the other groups should not play any key role. Those are just strategies they are using to derail the process, and we are not supportive of that.
I think we need to be aware that tactics has been used by developed countries all the time, and those type of tactics should not divert our attention from the actual essential finance scope that we are here in today. NCQG, our quantum, the 5 trillions, and also the quality of the NCQG and the climate finance.
And just as Simon Steele said, the time for theatrics is over. Second row.
Antonio Piemontese from Wired. Sorry. If you had to prioritize between adaptation and loss and damage, what would you choose?
I don't want to be put in a place to prioritize something that we are living in our daily life every day. Both are important. I mentioned in my intervention some of the very few examples. So we are already dealing with the loss and damages of climate change, and we already need to adapt. So it's like telling it's very weird for me to be cornered to pick how to survive, because both tools, loss and damage and adaptation, are important for us in the global south. And this is also another tactic that has been used in the negotiations, that we need to remove something in order to give. The better solution is to give a proper NCQG quantum to cover all the actions: mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage.
But I completely understand what you say, what you mean, but that's not going to be realistic in a political sense to keep it all as a whole. So, in my opinion, would you be satisfied if, for example, the focus this year would be on adaptation.
Yeah, so no, I think all pillars should be covered as sub-goals. There is no question about it here as civil society organization. It's very crucial and essential for us.
Yeah, we do not do trade-offs. We're talking of a full package here. We do not do trade-offs. As my colleague said, we're talking about lives. Any other questions? Front row. And short, please.
Yeah, thank you. A question for Safa about the trade-off between the military expenditure which is taking place and in Ukraine and Gaza, which is approximately $120 billion a year at the moment, and climate finance. I mean, that's killing people and destroying two nations which are going to be extremely expensive to reconstruct. So I'd be interested in your perspective on that.
We can talk about it definitely after the conference itself, but what I mentioned, and it's really important, it's that there is money. There is money from taxation, there is money that's being put up into militarization, and we see money coming up into bombing Gaza, Lebanon, Ukraine. There is money. Developed countries have money to create wars, but they need to divert this money from militarization and demilitarize, because it's also the emissions of the war. It's not only about the money, to support resilience in climate action and climate change.
We can take one more question, otherwise we'll need to wrap up. Any further questions? At the back there? Nice and short, please.
Munjid Jaddu from Palestinian News Network, Palestine. Like, from all what you were saying today, like, it seems that like the political game, it's the same political game that reflect itself on the environment and changing the weather. So is it really that politics play in everything and they deal with everything, even the atmosphere and weather that like affect all of us as human beings and in this earth? So they don't care. I mean, the big countries, the lead countries that lead the world are destroying the world in like of what you said today, that they are the one who are destroying the world and they don't care about it, even the world that they are live in, by not supporting and giving the support, giving the finance that needed to save the planet.
Yeah, it's been said many times in these conferences that politics as usual will get us nowhere. And unfortunately, that's what we see COP after COP after COP. Countries seem unable to break this deadlock of politics as usual, but we just have no more time for that, as Simon Steele was saying in the plenary.
And the last word to Safa.
Just wanted to echo that, yes, there is a mistrust between the global north and the global south in the world, but maybe this is the hope for us in those negotiations to gain this trust and regain by having the developed countries taking up their commitments and pledges towards the global south and towards a quantum and a good quality NCQG text in this COP.
Thank you. That is the end of the Climate Action Network press conference. See you tomorrow.